The call came at 4:52 in the morning. Cora Whitfield heard it through a fog of sleep, her phone buzzing against the nightstand like something desperate. She almost let it go to voicemail. She almost rolled over and pulled the pillow across her face and pretended the world could wait until 7. She didn't. Cora. It was James Aldridge, senior partner at Aldridge & Burns, and his voice had the specific flatness of a man trying very hard not to sound panicked. "We have a situation." She sat up. The room was dark. Outside her apartment window, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in November. Gray, wet, indifferent. What kind of situation? Victor collapsed last night. Cardiac event. He's in the ICU at Northwestern. They're saying he won't be cleared for anything strenuous for at least 6 weeks. Victor Hale was the firm's lead negotiator, 32 years of experience. The man who had personally closed 14 nine-figure deals. The man who was supposed to walk into the Meridian Group's boardroom in exactly 4 hours and finalize the acquisition terms for a $380 million merger. Cora set her feet on the cold floor. "Okay, the Meridian people are expecting us at 9. If we miss this window, Calloway, their CEO, he walks. He's already been half looking for an exit, and you know what happens if this deal collapses." James paused. "The Hargrove family loses everything they've built over 40 years. Every employee, the pension fund, all of it, James." Cora kept her voice steady. "I've been at this firm for 8 months. I know. I'm a junior associate. I know that too." There was a silence that felt like falling. "You've read every file on this deal," he said. "You drafted 3 of the counterproposals. You flagged the Meridian liability clause that saved us $2 million in potential exposure. Victor always said you were the only one who understood the technical structure as well as he did. Victor was being generous. Victor doesn't do generous. He does accurate." Another pause. "There's no one else, Cora. Not who knows this deal. Not who can walk in there in 4 hours." She looked at the dark window, at the rain sliding down the glass in thin, crooked lines. "I'll be ready," she said. She had exactly 4 hours to become someone she wasn't sure she was yet. The Hargrove family's story was the kind that used to be more common in America. A grandfather who started a regional manufacturing company with 12 employees and a borrowed warehouse in 1983, who built it slowly, carefully, into something that employed over 600 people across 3 states. Hargrove Industrial had survived recessions, a fire, 2 lawsuits, and a period in the late 90s that everyone who'd lived through it referred to simply as the bad year. What it hadn't survived was the retirement of Thomas Hargrove Sr., who handed the company to his son at 68 and watched from a distance, as the son made a series of decisions that were not quite wrong but were not quite right either. The kind of decisions that look fine on paper for 3 years and then reveal themselves all at once. The son's name was Dominic Hargrove. He was 41 years old, and he was the kind of man that rooms made space for. Tall, with the particular self-assurance of someone who had been told since childhood that he was exceptional and had subsequently done enough to mostly justify it. He wore his suits the way people wear armor, not for show, but because he genuinely believed they made him harder to hurt. Cora had never met him in person. She had read about him, the way you read about someone through documents and filings and the careful language of legal correspondence. She knew his company's debt structure better than she knew her own lease terms. She knew the Meridian deal was his last real option. What she didn't know, what she was about to find out, was whether he was going to make it easy or hard for someone to save him. He made it hard. The Meridian Group's offices occupied the 43rd floor of a building that seemed designed to make everyone who entered it feel slightly inadequate. The lobby had the particular marble coldness of a place where money is taken very seriously. Cora arrived 8 minutes early, which was 10 minutes later than she wanted, because the cab had gotten stuck on Michigan Avenue behind a delivery truck that seemed to have given up entirely on the concept of moving. She was wearing her best suit, navy, pressed. She had her files organized in a way that would have made Victor proud, or at least mildly approving. She had spent the cab ride reviewing the 7 points most likely to be contested, and the 3 places where Meridian's counsel had left deliberate ambiguity in the language that she intended to close. What she had not expected was Dominic Hargrove waiting in the lobby. He saw her come through the glass doors, and his expression did something complicated. He had clearly been expecting Victor. He had clearly been expecting someone who looked like they had been doing this for 30 years. Cora Whitfield was 29 years old. She was 5'4" in heels. She was carrying a tote bag that had a small coffee stain on the left strap that she had only noticed in the elevator on the way up and had spent the last 40 seconds trying to angle away from view. "You're not Victor," Dominic said. "No," Cora agreed. "I'm Cora Whitfield. I'm a junior associate at Aldridge & Burns. Victor Hale was hospitalized last night. Cardiac event. He's stable, but he won't be available today." She extended her hand. "I've been working on your acquisition file since the beginning. I know every clause, every counter-proposal, every liability flag. I'm prepared to represent your interests effectively today." Dominic looked at her hand. Then he looked at her. Then he looked at the elevator she had come out of, as if Victor might materialize from it. "This is a $380 million negotiation," he said. "I'm aware of that. You're a junior associate. You've mentioned that, yes." Something moved across his face. It might have been the beginning of a smile, or it might have been something else entirely. He shook her hand. His grip was firm, the kind people practice. "Calloway's already in the room," he said. "He's been here 20 minutes, and he's the type who treats early arrival as a power move. So is being kept waiting." "Then we shouldn't keep him waiting any longer," Cora said, and walked toward the elevator. She heard him follow. That was the first thing she won that day. Harlan Calloway was 63, and had the demeanor of a man who had been told no so many times in his early career that he had made the word physically impossible for himself to hear. He was the founder and CEO of the Meridian Group, and he had the kind of presence that financial journalists described as formidable and that everyone else just called intimidating. He was already seated at the head of the conference table when they walked in, flanked by 2 attorneys and a CFO who looked like he had not slept since Tuesday. The room smelled like coffee and the particular tension that accumulates when a deal has been in negotiation for 7 months and everyone is tired of everyone else. Calloway's eyes went to Cora, then to Dominic, then back to Cora. "Where's Hale?" he said. "Mr. Hale had a medical emergency last night," Cora said, setting her files on the table with deliberate calm. "I'm Cora Whitfield, representing Hargrove Industrial. I'm fully prepared to proceed." Calloway leaned back in his chair. "I've been negotiating with Hale for 7 months. I'm not starting over with someone who looks like she graduated last spring. I graduated 3 years ago," Cora said. "But the date on my diploma doesn't change the terms on page 47 of your last counterproposal, which contains a liability clause that your team appears to have inserted between the 6th and 7th revision without flagging it in the changelog. I'd like to address that before we discuss anything else." The silence in the room had a specific quality. Calloway's CFO shifted in his seat. One of the attorneys looked at the table. Calloway looked at Cora for a long moment. "Go ahead," he said. "The first 2 hours were the hardest." Calloway's team had 3 primary positions they were not willing to move from, or at least, that's how they had started the morning. What Cora had that they weren't expecting was not just knowledge of the documents. It was an understanding of why each clause existed, which meant she understood which ones were real positions and which ones were negotiating theater. The liability clause on page 47 was theater. She could tell from the way Calloway's lead attorney answered her questions, slightly too quickly, slightly too definitively, that it had been inserted to create a trading chip, something to give away in exchange for a concession elsewhere. She didn't take the bait. Instead, she spent 45 minutes methodically establishing the market precedent for the standard liability structure used in comparable acquisitions in the industrial sector over the previous 5 years. She had pulled 3 case studies the night before. Not for this meeting. She'd pulled them 3 weeks ago when she first noticed the potential weak point in Meridian's approach, and she walked through each one with the patience of someone who had nothing to prove and all the time in the world. She did not have all the time in the world. She was aware of that. But she had learned, early, that the appearance of patience is itself a form of power. Around the 90-minute mark, she became aware that Dominic was watching her differently than he had been at the start. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Calloway's team, on the documents, on the whiteboard where she had diagrammed the liability structure in a way that made the inserted clause look not just unfair but almost comically aggressive. "This isn't a negotiation," Calloway said at one point. "This is a lecture." "I can stop explaining if you'd prefer," Cora said. But I think your team will find the precedent useful when your board asks about this clause in the post-merger review. Calloway looked at his lead attorney. The attorney nodded very slightly. Take it out, Calloway said. That was the second thing she won. They broke for lunch at 12:30. Dominic found her in the hallway outside the conference room, standing by the window with a bottle of water she hadn't opened, looking at the city below. You want to tell me how you knew about the liability clause? He said. I read the changelog 3 weeks ago and noticed it wasn't there. Then I noticed it was. Things that appear without explanation in legal documents usually have a reason. Most people would have missed it. I know. He was quiet for a moment. Below them, Chicago moved in its usual way. Buses, taxis, the particular organized chaos of a city that had decided long ago it was too busy to be polite. Victor told me once that you were the best reader of documents he'd worked with in years, Dominic said. He told me that about 3 months ago. I didn't particularly pay attention at the time. People rarely pay attention to assessments of junior associates. That's probably true. He paused. I owe you an apology. For the lobby. Cora looked at him. He was staring out the window with the expression of a man who did not apologize frequently and was slightly uncomfortable with the mechanics of it. Forget it, she said. I don't want to forget it. I judged the situation in about 4 seconds based on information I didn't have. He turned to look at her. That's not something I'm in the habit of doing. We all do it, she said. I don't, he said, and there was something in the way he said it, not arrogant, just precise, that told her he believed it, and that the morning had unsettled him in a way he was still processing. She didn't say anything else. She opened the water bottle. After a moment, he said, What are you planning for the afternoon session? The inventory valuation dispute is going to be worse than the liability clause. I know, she said. I have a proposal for it. Walk me through it. So she did. The afternoon was worse than the morning, but Cora had expected that. The inventory valuation dispute was not theater. It was real. Calloway's team had commissioned an independent assessment that valued Hargrove Industrial's physical assets at 12% below the figure Hargrove had been using, and they intended to use that gap to renegotiate the purchase price downward by approximately $46 million. If they succeeded, the deal still closed, but the financial structure that Dominic needed to cover the company's existing debt obligations fell apart. He would close the acquisition and still lose the company, just more slowly. The assessor Meridian had used was a firm called Pacific Valuation Services. They had a solid reputation. The report was professional. It was also, Cora had determined 3 weeks ago, based on a comparison set that included 2 facilities in the Pacific Northwest that had fundamentally different operational structures than Hargrove's Midwest plants. She had a counter-assessment. She had commissioned it herself 6 weeks earlier, when she first saw the direction the valuation dispute was heading. She had paid for it out of a discretionary research budget that technically existed for exactly this kind of purpose, and that most junior associates never thought to use. When she put the counter-assessment on the table, Calloway's CFO looked at it and then looked at her. You had this done 6 weeks ago, the CFO said. 7, actually, Cora said. The firm that did it specializes in Midwest industrial assets. Their comparison set uses facilities with matching operational profiles. The CFO looked at Calloway. Calloway looked at the report. His lead attorney asked for 15 minutes to review it, which Cora granted with the equanimity of someone who had been expecting exactly this request. The 15 minutes turned into 40. Cora sat quietly and answered questions when asked and drank her 3rd coffee of the day, and thought about the 4 hours she had spent at her kitchen table 6 weeks ago, deciding whether to commission the counter-assessment or wait to see if it would be necessary. She had decided not to wait. She was glad. The 40 minutes ended with Calloway's CFO conceding the comparison methodology and agreeing to a revised valuation that split the difference. Not everything Cora had asked for, but close enough that the deal's financial structure held. Dominic, for the first time all day, exhaled visibly. That was the biggest thing she won. The rest was details. The final terms were signed at 4:17 in the afternoon. Not e-signed, not pending signatures, actually signed, all parties, in the room. Calloway had insisted on wet signatures for the closing documents, which was old-fashioned in a way that Cora found unexpectedly charming. As the room cleared, she gathered her files with the systematic efficiency of someone who had been running on adrenaline for 11 hours and was beginning to feel it. Her hands were steady. She had made sure of that. Cora. She looked up. Dominic was standing at the end of the table. Everyone else had gone. Calloway's team, the Meridian attorneys, the CFO who had probably gone to find a couch somewhere and sleep until Thursday. "You saved this deal," he said. "I did my job. You did more than your job." He came around the table, not quickly, not with any of the deliberate performance she had come to expect from men of his particular background, just plainly, like someone who wanted to be closer to the conversation. That counter-assessment, the liability clause research, those weren't things anyone asked you to do. Someone needed to do them. Victor didn't. Victor had 17 other deals running simultaneously. "I had one." Dominic was quiet for a moment. "You've been on this file for 8 months. Yes, you cared about it." She considered that. Outside, the November light was doing its 4 o'clock thing, going golden and thin against the windows. The city was audible even 43 floors up, a low, continuous hum that she had always found, secretly, more comforting than silence. "I cared about the 600 people who work for your company," she said. "That's not a line. I looked them up. There's a woman named Linda who's been in the Dayton plant for 22 years. There's a man in the Indianapolis facility who trained under your grandfather." She picked up her tote bag, the one with the coffee stain she had stopped worrying about sometime around 10:30. "The deal mattered because they matter. That's why I did the work." Something shifted in his face. Not dramatically, it wasn't a movie moment. But something that had been held carefully in place all day moved slightly, the way a very controlled person sometimes lets go of control for just long enough to be human. "Can I take you to dinner?" he said. The question surprised her, which surprised her more. She had thought she was past being surprised today. "As a professional courtesy?" she said. "No," he said. "Not as a professional courtesy." She looked at him for a moment. She had spent 8 months reading documents that told her who Dominic Hargrove was in the language of business. The decisions he made under pressure, the risks he took and didn't take, the things he protected and the things he let go. Documents told you things about people that people didn't tell you about themselves. "Yes," she said. "Dinner." They went to a small Italian place on Randolph Street that Dominic apparently went to often enough that the host knew his name and a preference for the booth by the far wall. It was not the kind of restaurant Cora would have expected him to choose, not grand enough, not performative enough. It was just good, the way some places are simply good, with checkered cloths and wine that arrived without extensive discussion. He asked her about herself, which men of his type did not always do. And when she told him about growing up in Rockford, with a mother who worked double shifts and a scholarship that had felt like a rescue boat, he listened without looking for the pause where he could speak. She asked him about the company, and he talked about his grandfather in a way that was clearly not something he said often, with the particular unguardedness of someone who has been carrying a weight for long enough that putting it down, even briefly, is almost physical. "He trusted me with it," Dominic said. "I almost lost it. You didn't, because of you. Because of the work," she said. "I just did the work." He smiled, a real one, different from the controlled expression she'd been reading all day. It made him look like a different version of himself, or maybe just a less defended one. "You know what I kept thinking in there this afternoon," he said. "What? That whoever trained you didn't teach you everything you know." He looked at her across the table. "Some of it just came from you." Cora thought about the counter-assessment she had commissioned 6 weeks ago. She thought about the 4 a.m. call and the cold floor and the rain on the window. She thought about Linda in the Dayton plant and the man in Indianapolis who had worked under Thomas Hargrove Sr. "I grew up watching someone work herself half to death and still almost not make it," she said. "I decided early that if I was going to work that hard, I was going to do it for things that were worth it." Dominic was quiet for a moment. The restaurant moved around them. Low voices, the soft percussion of dishes, the small, comfortable noise of a place full of people who were glad to be somewhere warm. "Are you worth it?" he said. "The 600 employees," she said. "I meant you," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. It was a different kind of reading than she had been doing all day. Not documents, not language structured to obscure. Just a person across a table saying something true. "I'm working on that," she said. He nodded, like that was an answer he understood. 3 weeks later, Victor Hale called her from his recovery at home. "Calloway called me," Victor said. He sounded like himself again, which was to say, precise, deliberate, and slightly amused at most things. He wanted to know if Aldridge and Burns could spare you for a consulting role on a Meridian internal restructuring. Cora set down her coffee. He what? The man who spent 45 minutes trying to dismiss you apparently left that room with a different impression. A pause. James is going to make you an offer. Probably Monday. I'd let him finish the whole thing before you say yes. He tends to start lower than he means. Victor, thank you. For whatever you told them about me. I told them what was accurate, Victor said, which was exactly what she had expected him to say, and exactly right. She hung up the phone and stood for a moment in her kitchen with its north-facing window and its view of a parking structure and the sliver of Lake Michigan visible if you stood at exactly the right angle. She thought about Dominic, who had texted twice since dinner, once to say the closing documents had been filed, and once for no particular professional reason that she could identify. She had texted back both times. She thought about Linda in the Dayton plant, who didn't know her name and never would, and who would still have her job next year because of a counter-assessment, commissioned at a kitchen table at 4 a.m, 6 weeks before anyone knew it would matter. She thought about what it meant to do good work, not for recognition, not for the offer that was coming Monday, not even for the man who had asked if she was worth it across a table on Randolph Street, just for the work itself, for what the work protected. She turned back to her desk. There were 3 new files waiting, each with their own hidden clauses, their own buried risks, their own 600 people who needed someone to read carefully enough to find them. She sat down and opened the first one.